Hello and welcome to Don't Make These Mistakes with Your Uni Essay. My name is Alex Patel and this is a weird edutainment bite. Part 2, don't forget the reader. One of the biggest mistakes that students can make is to think that they understand the information and all they need to do is put it down in writing and that the reader will understand. And that's not true. Talk to anyone who has marked any essays and they will tell you when there's a bad structure and it doesn't make sense and it doesn't flow, it takes so much time to try and understand what's going on. And it's really hard work. Whereas an essay that's well written, that has been thought out, the argument flows and it makes sense, it really takes the reader by the hand, takes them through it, and everything that the writer was trying to communicate gets across to the reader. And that's why we don't forget our reader. A marker who has understood what you were trying to say will give you higher marks. So the first thing you have to do is to work out for yourself what your argument is. So what you've got on the screen here is a brainstorm. So it's building on the question we had in the last section, which was, how has progress in understanding the brain changed psychology for better or for worse? And what I've done is to jot down different aspects. So this is based on the recommended reading. So you can see those laid out there. Now, we don't have to look at the detail on this, but I'm going to show you how to use a mind map such as this to work out your argument. So the first thing you do is to think, okay, well, this is the question. Is any of the information I've got jotted down here irrelevant? I might think, well, okay, I don't actually want to use this as part of my argument, so I'm going to cross that out. And I don't think I want to use this. I think that's giving too much information. It's kind of diluting the point I'm trying to make. So what I'm going to do is focus on this part and tie it in with this section here. So this is the point I'm making, and then this is the evidence I'm going to use to support that point. And then these sections here link together very nicely. So I'm going to group those together. And then we have a third section here. And now I can think about, well, in order to answer this question, what order would I present these points? How do they make the most sense? So maybe I should do this bit first, this one second, and this one third. And there we go. Just like that, we have an essay structure. Over to you. Jot down in the center of a piece of paper the essay question, and around it brainstorm all the bits of information that you think are important in answering it. The second step is to then go through, eliminate things that you don't think are that important and a bit of a distraction, and then to group things together that you think you can present together. There's a common theme within those. And then to order those. So you're really looking to not present too much information, but to have maybe 3 to 5 key points that you're trying to get across in your argument. If you have more than that, it can actually start to become confusing for the reader. So those aren't 3 to 5 bits of information, bits of evidence. No, those are the key points, maybe the sections in your essay that you're really trying to communicate as part of your argument. Now, I did promise some memes. Certainly how I feel. So once you've got started writing your paragraphs, it might be an idea to go back and have a look at the first few you've written, because there is a skill to it. And many of you may have learnt this type of technique at college, but there's always room for developing it further. Writing is an ongoing learning process. So the features of a good paragraph that really help a reader follow through are that it starts with an introductory sentence. It tells you what the key point of that paragraph is right at the start, really clearly. Brilliant. We then start to present evidence. So we've got the key point, and then we've got evidence. So you can see, as you would expect in university essay, we've got citations of research, another one here, which support that key point that's being made, that argument that's being made. We then get a concluding sentence that pulls everything together. And perhaps this links to the next section in the essay, or perhaps this links back to the essay question itself and just makes it really clear to the reader how the key point that's being made answers that essay question. Now, there's one more thing you can look for in your own writing, and that's the balance between descriptive writing and critical analysis and challenging, because you might find in some writing that you're being quite descriptive. You're simply talking about other people's research and you're not necessarily challenging it or making links between their research and other people's research. So that's being critical, that's thinking about the work. So, for example, you might look through here, say, okay, the first statement here is simply a statement of work, but then we are starting to get some thought. We're linking this piece of research to the previous one. And then towards the end, we see that actually it starts to get a bit more critical because we've got an insight into how the next paragraph is going to evaluate how successful these extrapolations have been. So including that critical analysis in your work is what will push you from a 2-2 grade boundary up to a 2-1 and a first. And that's really what we're trying to do. So it makes sense to go back through your work and think, where am I being critical? Is that clear enough to the reader? Next challenge. Get hold of one of your paragraphs and break it apart like we've just done there. Does it have an introductory sentence? Does it make a key point for that paragraph? Does it provide evidence to support and successfully argue that point? Are you being critical? And lastly, is there a concluding sentence that draws together the key points, emphasizes it to the reader, and perhaps links it back to the essay question and says, you know, this is why it's really important to answering that question. Now, another thing you can do, which is really important, is to grab hold of the reader's attention. And you would do that with your introduction. And then you would leave them with a strong message about what your essay was aiming for with your conclusion. So this top and tailing is a really powerful way of putting together a strong argument. So what do you find in an introduction? Well, good introductions typically tell the reader how you've interpreted the essay question. So how are you defining it? How are you going to explain that? The next thing they do is to state or explain why it's important. So this is where we grab the reader's attention. You know, this is important because it determines how the funding and focus of all the research around the world in psychology, multi-million-pound investments here, great minds across the world, how they think about psychology, where it's going to go in the future. So pay attention to this essay. This is good stuff. We need to know the answer to this. The third part of a good introduction tends to explain to the reader how you're going to answer that essay question. So it might be the different sections, or, as is the case here, it might be by saying whose research you're going to look at and what you're going to do with it. Are you going to compare and contrast? Are you going to map one onto another? Are you going to evaluate, for example? So challenge number 5, with your introduction, have you written it already? Maybe you want to have a go now. If you've already written one, then does it explain your interpretation of the essay question? Does it grab the reader's attention by explaining why it's an important question? Does it explain how you're going to answer that question and what sources, theories, or analysis you're going to use? Because that sets the reader up for kind of building a framework for how they're going to understand your essay, gives them a taster, a bit of a contents page, an introduction. But it also tells them that you've got a plan, you've got a strong argument that you're going to take them through. And as I was saying, you really need to wrap that up with a strong conclusion. This is the last thing they're going to read, so this is the takeaway message. This is how you have impact. And actually, it's quite simple. So again, we're looking for three things. Firstly, a summary of the key points that you've mentioned within the body of the essay. Secondly, a concluding statement as to what you believe from your findings, from your analysis. And lastly, you can think about the implications. So this is your conclusion, but what are the implications for, and this is when you bring in the reason why you said this work was so important in the introduction, for that. So in this case, it's whether psychological research benefits from progress around understanding how the brain works. So challenge 6, take hold of your conclusion and think about, have you summarized the key points of your argument? Have you stated a final conclusion? And perhaps this is where you acknowledge the limitations of that conclusion. Maybe it's only applicable in research in the UK or the United States or in one particular area of psychological research. Then you can consider the implications of that conclusion. Have you done that in your conclusion? So hopefully at this point, it has left the reader with a very strong message. So in this video, we refined our argument and put it into writing. In the next video, we're going to look at one of the big mistakes that many students make, which is not editing and proofreading their work. So let's get on to it.